Hey everybody, welcome to the December 27th content edition as we kind of look back at 2020 and we look forward to 2021 that we're really just excited about. We're expectant for what God has for us in 2021, but we really believe finishing the year well is really important, which is the reason we're having this conversation right now. And we're really excited that you're engaging with us in this. We're gonna talk about a good bit of stuff, and the big thing is the personal retreat. And the idea that it's going to kind of cause us to take a timeout. So unpack that a little bit. What does it look like for us to take a timeout before we go into 2021?
Sure. First of all, thanks again for being a part of this. And Carson, thank you for doing this. 2020 is a lot of times at the end of a year, it comes to a close, and 2020 is not going to close like a game is over. It's not going to be over like a game. Like usually, the game is over, you put it aside, you move on to the next one. But I think the close of 2020 is going to be more like a timeout. It's like the game is on the line, the pressure's high, anxiety, everything's kind of at a fever pitch, and the coach calls a timeout. And the reason that picture is stuck in my head is because what happens in a timeout is you get back and you regroup and you pull away from things, but you enter back into the game in the exact same situation that you left it in. I think that's what 2021 is going to be like. A lot of us are looking forward to the end of 2020 as though it's going to be over and we're going to be done with it and push it aside. But we're going to enter back into 2021 in a lot of the same circumstances that we left. And so I think this particular season, this week that's following, provides a really unique opportunity for us to take and to embrace a timeout for the sake of how we want to re-enter into the same circumstances that we have left.
And as we look at 2020, we know it's been a complicated, long, and very hard year, which makes this conversation and the content that we're really bringing out of it so important. Quite possibly some of the most important content that we're going to talk about this calendar year because of how we finished this year. And that brings me to this week in the year, and as we get towards New Year's, you say a lot that it's your favorite time of year. Why is that?
It is my favorite time of the year, and it always has been. I think this year it's actually even more pointed. I don't think you're overstating the fact this may be the most important opportunity that we have for 2020. I really believe that. And the reason I like it is because it gives me some space to finish the year. It gives me a chance to pay attention to some things. Usually, after Christmas, in a normal year, you work up to Christmas happens, and it's just sort of this collapse. And the next thing you know, you're making promises about, the next year and how you're going to be a different person and a better person. This is going to be the best year ever. And we lose those 7 days in between Christmas and New Year. And so I've tried to leverage those days to really pay attention to how I finish the year and bring a sense of closure to a season. And again, this year, what I'm looking to do is to really find out how to create a sense of closure to some things, to some narratives, to some tensions, to some frustrations, so that I can re-enter the year with a renewed sense of vision, a renewed sense of call, and a renewed hope into what really lies ahead for us.
Yeah, that's really good. I think as we have been talking about this, and really as we prepared for this conversation, we talked about two really big things that we wanted to like the two big goals for our time together. One is to understand the implication of God's capacity to use everything. That's a big thing we're going to hit a lot at the end of our conversation. And the second thing is to understand what the availability of a joy that's not circumstantial looks like. Unpack those two ideas.
Yeah, so we left, again, the series we just finished on joy, and we talked about this idea that we believe, and we can say, okay, there's a joy that's been made available to us. And that in that, what we find is that means the joy isn't dependent on our circumstances. And often the only way we find that is when we can no longer be dependent on our circumstances. That 2020 is sort of stripped away, or the rug's been pulled out from underneath us, where there's just been chronic uncertainty and we haven't been able to get a grip on how to manage or control that uncertainty, to make circumstances such that we can sort of take our joy from them. And what's left is really where we see where our joy really comes from and what Jesus has promised us. And that's what we've been exploring. Those are hard things for us to realize, but they're important things for us to learn how to trust.
And I think that there's so many tools around our church and around kind of our heartbeat as who we are that we can use to process that what that looks like. Journaling is obviously a very easy one that we can look back and go, I was thinking about this, I was processing this at this point in the year. I can see God's faithfulness in that. I think My One Word is another part of that we talk about a good bit around this time of the year, typically talking about it looking forward to what's to come. But that's another tool that we can use to look back and go, my word played out in this.
Yes. And that's really the most important thing, to me, where this started was, we pick a word. And for those people who aren't familiar with that, right, my one word really serves as a lens, not a promise. When we get to the new year, we typically make promises to ourselves about how we're going to be different. And it never works. And what my one word is it simply establishes a way for us to get a vision for what kind of person we want to become and the things that we hope God will do in our lives, and then pick a word that allows us to see through the lens of that word through the entire year. And the reason that couples, with the end of the year is I would like to look back at my word and what I've seen or what I've noticed through that lens over the year. In fact, this January I'll pick my 15th word.
That's crazy.
And
That's
people email me or DM me and say, Mike, I like my word for 2020. Can I keep it for 2021? And what I say is, you can really do whatever you want, but what you don't underestimate that your words don't go away. The new words just add to. When I look at the arc of those words, I really see a lot of God's own story playing out in my own life, and it's something that I cherish, that I have in my journal. I keep a list in my journal every year. I just write all the words down, and I just look at that and meditate. And so I use that to finish my year, as I'll be doing that next week.
Yeah, as I look back at 2020, my word this year has been
what was your
good.
word?
So it's a statement. No, I didn't cheat. I got your permission. Let the record show you said that it was okay. It's Limoges, less of me, more of Jesus. I really felt led into that. I really felt like I needed to spend time processing.
You just play the God card, and it's all fine.
That's what happened in my
If God gave you the word, then you can say
all
you
right,
can't
moving
have it.
on. So as we're talking about my one word, that is an incredible tool, and we're going to talk a little bit more about it in the new year. But for right now, the big encouragement, the big challenge that we are giving everybody watching this video and everybody who listens to anything that we have to say really is to do the personal retreat. Yeah. And two things that just I want to highlight as we start talking about the personal retreat. One is the author, the guy who spent time processing, praying, and writing it, Tony Ripa. I know it's a collaborative effort on an incredible team here we have, but Tony really knocked it out of the park this year. Yeah,
Tony's written these for the better part of years, and Tony has a really tough job because he has to take kind of what happens in my brain and to put it on paper and to distribute it in small group material and all the other study supplemental materials that we provide. And the personal retreat is one that he just has done extraordinarily well at, but this year is particularly pointed and I think powerful for what we're experiencing because it talks about Elijah. And sort of Elijah's collapse at the end of a season. He basically is like, I am done with everything. And it just kind of is framed from how God meets him there. I think it's a really powerful exercise. And one of the other things I would say about the personal retreat is we say this all the time, but literally everybody who does it, they come back and they say, I am so glad that I took the time to do it. It'll walk you through some really simple exercises to process what we've been through. And it does help you to sort of start to set your vision for the next year and for what's in store, what God has in store for you in the year to come.
I think that no one is immune from that. No one is on the outside of that. We want everybody to do this. So if you're listening to this right now and you're like, Carson, Mike, I don't have the time.
Yep.
I don't want to print it out. I don't want to go through it. Or that's what super engaged people do. That's not that you've got to do it because it's gonna be really, really helpful to you. And I believe it's gonna help you finish the year well. And we're saying that the stakes are high.
Yep.
Why are we saying that?
Well, because I think unlike any other year, this is going to be the one where we want this behind us simply because it's been hard. And, one of the things that we talk about is from Ecclesiastes 7:8, where it says, better is the end of a thing than its beginning, which is what Solomon writes in Ecclesiastes. Better is the end of a thing than its beginning. And all of us can look and say, 2020, the end of 2020 is better than its beginning. And the reason we think that is because it was bad. And what we want to do is we want to say it was a bad year, it was a tough year, we're just going to put it behind us and get on with it. But the reason the end of a thing is better than its beginning is not because we're moving on from it. It's because the thing actually mattered. And the stakes are high because you want to really understand what was happening in 2020, what he allowed or what he's doing in and through our lives through this tough year that we don't want to miss simply because we didn't pay attention to it. And the personal retreat allows you to sort of take and get some perspective and find a way to see and to sense why this year matters for who we're becoming and what lies ahead for us in the future.
Which is why we're saying it's not a finish line.
Right.
It's a timeout.
Yep.
And you've got some descriptors to timeouts that I think are helpful to kind of frame our perspective.
Yeah, because we've all been in a place, if you've seen a game where everything's about, to change, the emotions are high, and sometimes it's those places where we're most likely to make a mistake. because we've sort of lost the fundamentals. And a timeout, the coach calls it, to sort of stop the momentum. It's like a way to go, hey, we're going to stop the momentum of the game. We're going to stop the trajectory, the way things are going. And for some of us, that's what we need, right? We need for the trajectory of what this year has been to just be disrupted so we can stop. And I just made a quick list, right? It also, you get to take a breath. You get to kind of get out from right. We get to get out from the pressure and the chaos that we feel and just take a breath. And using that space between Christmas and New Year's to do that, to take a break, you'll find rest and to re-energize. Oftentimes in a timeout, the coach will say, hey, look at the score. Hey, look at one another. It's a chance for us to get perspective, to realize that it's not over, that things are still available to us, that we can make choices and decisions. And it's what we're talking about as we concluded the series on joy, is that it's a time for us to recalibrate and to realize that we only have to be faithful in the moment. Mm-hmm. It's a place for us to do that and to think about that. And I think it just sort of slows everything down enough, and it prepares us to re-enter the same circumstances with fresh vision and maybe a fresh sense of energy and calling for what's going to be required of us going forward.
Yeah, I love the idea of looking back and seeing all that God has done and all that God has taught us. And I don't want to say that and sound insensitive to all that's happened in 2020.
Right. It's been hard.
Our heartbeat in this is to recognize and to sit in all of the hard things that are represented in our church, that are going on currently, the things that have gone on throughout the life of our church. But one thing that we've been holding on to, that you've been leading us really, really well through, is the idea that God uses everything. And I think that could seem like, oh, they just say that. But that's something that we believe. Yeah. Help us kind of go into that a little bit.
Well, when you think about it, when you think that God uses everything, that the promise of his redemption is he takes everything that was used to cause harm or to undermine us, and he has this unbelievable way to take it and to turn it for good. That's what Romans 8 says, right? We know that God works all things together for good for those who love him and are called according to his purposes. And those aren't just trite statements. Those are sort of bedrock foundations that I've found sufficient to carry the weight of my hope, that keeps me moving into the future with a sense of optimism and hopefulness and longing for what is ahead, knowing that no matter how hard or difficult or what has occurred, there's some miraculous way that God has the capacity to take it and to cause it to become something that's usable in his hands, to redeem it for his purposes. And we cling to that, especially through the hard years. And that's one of the reasons this personal retreat is so important, is we can stop and say, God, can you help us? You're not going to have it all figured out, but you begin to seek him and see him and begin to understand a little bit more clearly and trust him a little bit more as we walk into what he has for us.
That's good. And as we are seeking to trust what he has for us, I come back to this idea that our joy, the joy that we have access to, is unconditional.
Right.
Which means that we don't necessarily just rejoice that 2020 is over, or that one day the pandemic is over, or the election is over, or whatever mile marker that we put in front of us. It's different. It's deeper than that.
Yeah. It's for us, and that's what we were saying, are we going to rejoice when COVID's behind us? Of course we are. And that's not to be taken lightly, or it doesn't mean that it's not real joy. It will be, but it just means we don't have to wait for that in order to find this sense, this real kind of resulting emotion. It's when we connect with God and we learn of his love for us and we sort of ponder that and we're reminded of that allows us or causes us to trust him. And we trust his faithfulness, we trust his goodness towards us, and it allows us to make the decisions and to step in to the future in ways that we might not normally. We might be more hesitant or more driven by fear or more driven by anxiety. Instead, we're driven by his calling on us to live and to walk with him, knowing that he's going to be faithful to us every step along the way.
Yeah, and one of the best ways that we can see that faithfulness, that we can see it clearly, is to call a timeout
and look
and to do the personal retreat. To take a couple hours, put it in your calendar if you have to. Do it at night when your kids go to bed. Whatever you've got to do to sit in front of this retreat and really process through it. You've started it, I know. What are a couple things that or maybe a thing that you pulled out of it that you're like, wow, that was really good and really helpful?
Yeah, there were a couple of things in there. And again, it's downloadable and you print it off, and I've already printed mine off and been working through it. It takes a couple hours. I've been doing some other things with it. But a couple of things I thought were really interesting and worthy of noting is it talks about identifying God's provision, about what he has done and how he has been faithful throughout this very difficult year. It's easy to think of all the things that he allowed in our lives that we wish he wouldn't have allowed. But it's another thing to stop and say, wow, God, you have been so unbelievably faithful to me, and you've provided for me and for us perfectly. The other thing, and maybe this is, to me, maybe the most important, is that what happens is when you stop and take time is you get to confront the old stories, these driving narratives, so that they don't dictate the new season that's available. And we don't want to drag the past into the future. We want to bring it to a conclusion and say, okay, God, here's what 2020 was like. We're going to offer it to you, and we're going to trust you to make this usable for the future that you have for us.
Yeah, I love that, because one of the things that I pulled out of it was that obstacles are opportunities in disguise.
Yeah.
And Tony leads us through this really beautiful part out of the text that we kind of follow throughout the retreat is why God. That question, like asking why God. I think we all probably to some extent, some maybe more than others, are asking why God.
And it's a natural question.
It's a natural question, and it's a good question.
Yeah.
And I think it's intentionally included in this.
Right.
But leading us to a better question, the next question, what now?
Yeah.
And asking it to God, like, what now? Lord, like, what do you have in this moment as we look towards the future? And I think that how that relates to us allowing his kingdom to come, in the world that we live in is so important.
And that's really what I would want for us as we get out of this. When we think about the church and what God has been doing, I'm not, my posture is like, I'm not trying to figure out how we're going to change all the circumstances we face. What I'm trying to do is to lead and to pastor in such a way that that shapes the way we respond to the circumstances that we're in. I believe that when we begin to live and take our cues, we seek first God's kingdom, we find out where he has, his rule takes authority in our lives, in my life, and then I live underneath his rule and his authority in all the places where I have influence. If we do that together, right, we will change the way that we enter into the circumstances that we face. We'll change the way that we enter into the world in which we live, and I believe ultimately that will be the thing that changes the world.
Yeah, I could not agree more. I think this conversation has been really helpful, and I hope that it's been encouraging. Do you have any closing ideas or any thoughts we can take with us today?
I just want to say thank you for participating and for being a part of all that God is doing, and please take time and schedule and make some time for a personal retreat. I do believe it will give you some perspective, and it will help you sense some things that God is doing so that we can re-enter 2021. We can enter into that new year with a fresh sense of calling and vision for the things that God has for us and what's going to be required of us to live as followers of Jesus.
That's really, really strong. I'm so excited. And if we're saying this through the camera, that's okay, because that's how we're recording this right now. But we're calling a timeout for you. We're saying take the personal retreat. It's on our website. It's going to be really helpful to you. We're excited for 2021. We're so expectant for so many things that are happening in our church and in our world that we believe God is doing to bring his hope and love to every corner of it. So we love you guys, and we will see you in 2021.